That's how big tech exists. Now, it's a component part, right? The same way that medicine is like drugs are a component part of a care plan. I think it's increasingly become a component part, but communication is a huge part of what we do, and communication is all going digital, so that's becoming more and more prevalent in people's thinking. And then also the really boring stuff is getting so voluminous that that's what AI is really exciting. Wouldn't it be amazing to have a little co-pilot that sits there that says, like, oh, tell me about what I might infer from this or whatever else. So that sort of stuff is quite exciting.
Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of the Healthtech Podcast. With me today, delighted to have my, ex-boss, longtime friend, Healthtech royalty, I'd probably say at this point, Umang Patel, who was my boss when I was an F2 doctor on neonates at St. Peter's, which is actually where my wife has just delivered my first son only 5 weeks ago. So, heck of a moment, man. You also episode 4 of this podcast. So it is absolutely wild to think that I've not had you back on in like 6 years. And
gosh.
Honestly, that's how long it's, and a lot has actually happened in that 6 years as well. But listen, dude, honestly, absolute pleasure to have you back. We're going to talk about obviously your journey back then it was Babylon that you were at. So a lot's happened obviously since Babylon now to Microsoft, and CCIO at Microsoft as well. What a title that is. Much coveted job in health tech. And Microsoft doing some really interesting stuff in the space. We can talk about that as well. But yeah, obviously you and I, we chat a lot about the state of AI in the world, and let's not really mention the US, or maybe let's mention the US and the sort of tech bros or, making all sorts of having all sorts of outrageous power at the moment, and perhaps the requirement for a sensible voice, which is something that you're setting up, which is very interesting. But I'll shut up and let you speak, dude. How are you?
Good, thanks. Do you know, you said that and I suddenly had this thought, right? When we first worked together on a neonatal unit, and at the risk of aging us, I think we were still handwriting blood labels.
Yeah.
Right. And then
we were, I can remember it.
Our children all have 4-letter names, I realised. And so, I'm sure it's wrong. We were no long names because we were fed up of writing them on the blood bottles.
Yeah, subliminally. Subliminally, that is the case, isn't it?
So, anyway, I thought that was, I wondered if that from then on. So, but it's great to be back. Like you say, so much has happened in that time. I thought I'd annoyed you. I was I think you were my first ever proper podcast. I was like, oh man, I've messed that up. And,
there was just a lot of people to get through, man. There's just a lot of people to get through. But listen. So, when you came on last time, you're obviously at Babylon. Lots happened at Babylon. Delighted to say I am actually going to be able to speak to Ali Parsa. I think, fingers crossed. Got a chat with him tomorrow, so going to see how that goes and see if I can convince him to go that final yard and record an episode. So we'll see. So I don't want to go into the Babylon story too much, but I guess since Babylon, you've ended up at Microsoft, and a heck of a job, a heck of a title at Microsoft. And as I say, much coveted in health tech, a role like that. And you've obviously, to remind people of your story, you've done so much in terms of quality improvement. Obviously, you're a pediatrician, so much in quality improvement, so many projects, so many business cases in hospitals. You've worked in the insurance sector. You've done startup stuff. This has been a long time coming, I guess. But yeah, tell me, from Babylon, how does one end up at Microsoft, and why, I guess, did you take this role, and tell us that bit of the story.
Yeah, of course. We IPA'd at Babylon, and I was looking around, and I remember it so vividly. We were, I've got this lovely memory. We're in the London office. There was a few of us that had been there for a long time. We were all in little rooms so that we could come up on the screen behind the guys that were in New York, because we couldn't all go because of the pandemic and other bits and pieces. And we're in this room, and we all had champagne. It was middle of the morning or lunchtime or something. So we were all a bit squiffy and so excited, everything had done it. And I remember I just finished watching Schitt's Creek, again, having watched all of the pandemic bits. And I suddenly walked around, I walked out of the office, looked at everyone and thought, oh my God, it's my season finale. Like, I'm just like done. Like, there's no reinvention of a character here. You know, like, I obviously was expecting it to go on to great things, and there were great people there that, you know, unfortunately didn't get to take it on to the next level. But I was like, my bit in this, at the very least, is done.
So interesting. You'd completed your story arc. It's funny because, I mean, how early were you about? In fact, I can remember bumping into you like on the tube, and you're like, yeah, I'm just doing like a pricing model for something like on the tube.
yeah. Like, well, I was number 10, so like really early on. And like, so you sit there, and yeah, I remember so vividly, and like I was going through some WhatsApp photos the other day, and I like one of the unlocks and one of the challenges we had came to me in the Paediatric A&E department, and I've scribbled it on history paper, and then taken a photo of it and sent it off to the team to be like, I think this is how we get around some of the things that are blocking us. And like, yeah, like it was amazing to sort of go through those phases, be like, look, okay, there's a problem, but it doesn't really, like, we've got to solve it. So let's just keep on thinking about it, keep on solving it, keep on finding out more.
So what made it feel like a finale then? Was it looking around like at faces you didn't know, or was it that you'd just reached this goal that you'd all set out to do? Like, what was it that made it feel like a finale rather than like the exciting bit of, oh, now we get to do this, that, and the other?
Yeah, game, like, it really was that story arc. You know, you're like, well, I've got to then be the next character in this thing going up. And I was like, I didn't think there was a character that really worked for me that I could play, right? And like, accidentally, you ended up being, I'm trying to think of a good one, like Ian Beale, right? Like, you know, you've been in EastEnders for way too long, or whatever it is, and like, therefore, the only thing that can happen to you are like more depressing things for your storyline. So it's a bit like, well, you've been around for a long time. Do you want to cover this stuff, which is really hard and has no sort of creativity? You take a lot of the blame for anybody that's been early stage and then grown through things. Not that many people were left that were there when we came up with the pricing model. So when somebody comes in and goes, oh, hey, like, what idiot came up with this pricing model? You're like, well, like me, but we agreed it as a massive group. So how did we... but they sort of, you sort of take the indirect blame, if not the direct blame, for a lot of stuff that people throw away. My view of that, actually, it's a bit like, you know, when you, like, once we had a plumber come round to the house, and he was like, who, you know, what idiot did this? And I was like, well, it was you about 3 years ago. But like, there was always this, and it just made me giggle, because it's always like, it's always someone else's fault. Like, I think one of the problems that I think we had culturally at Babylon, or was struggling to try and get around, was that, like, what idiot did that as we were scaling, because that didn't scale. And I was like, well, like me, but like, it was a champagne problem. We never expected to be so big. Like, how do we fix it? Versus being like, well, that was wrong. And anybody that's doing a startup or building a scale up or in that, I think that would be like top counsel. Like, think about, how do you avoid it when people just go, well, it's because of that I can't do this, as opposed to trying to have a mindset of, oh, actually, that's amazing they did that. Like, what did they learn from doing that we can then take on to the next thing?
I guess as well, like, you're, from a career perspective as well, you're sort of at your peak value almost at that point. You know, you did the hard thing. You were part of that team. You've got all of those yards from the early days, and now you've hit the IPO. There must be part of it as well, just thinking like, yeah, you're sort of like the striker that's just had a 40-goal season, and now the offers might be coming in, or now's a good time to look around, kind of thing.
I remember thinking, like, do you want to go and do startup again? Do you want to do medium-sized stuff again? Do you want to do big stuff? And so I had a book, and I was like writing out all of these like companies or ideas in these things, like in these 3 stages. And then it was Junaid Badger, I think you've had on. So Junaid was like, well, what about Microsoft? I'm here and it's good fun. And I was like, well, never thought about big tech, but interesting. Okay, it's worth having a conversation. And I had a chat, and like a few things that came out of Microsoft which I just thought were great. Like, one was, they were like, well, like, we're massive. Like, do you think the NHS could run without Microsoft? And I was like, actually, no. Like, if you put it like that, then you sort of, and your heart's in the NHS, and like then you're sort of obliged to think, well, I want to go at least and see what's going on there. And then the second thing was, they were obsessed, and still are, about this growth mindset. So I remember in the interview, they were like, what, like, tell me about your growth mindset. And I was like, well, I started at Aviva because I couldn't work out how like money flowed through healthcare. So I wanted to go to an insurance company. I then went to Babylon because I couldn't work out how we actually made a massive change, like, and we managed to do that. And now I want to know what a big company does in order to like cement or embed that type of change. And like going to the fact that we have to use Microsoft stuff across all the things we do, I'd love to know that. And I think that was it really. Just like at Babylon, we dreamed about being really big. The idea of going somewhere really big was too compelling. And here I am.
Yeah, it's a big name, obviously. And I guess comes with a lot of pride of being able to go to somewhere like Microsoft, but also it's a big title as well, CCIO. So what was the role? Or was it a blank piece of paper? Or was this a we just want you? Or was this a we want someone to do these things? Like what way round was that conversation?
Truthfully, you get to pick your title on LinkedIn. Like it's not like there was a CCIO job spec that came out. I mean, there are some like for the global medical, say David in America, perhaps, and others. But what I realized about being at a big org, and again, it's fascinating. You don't think about it when you're little and growing, but like when you're at a big org, and actually I should have thought about this from being in the NHS and other bits. Like, it's not like you can go and just not fit into the way that it works already. So what Microsoft would say is we want to do more stuff in healthcare in the same way that we want to do more stuff in certain industries, whatever that industry may be. We aren't the experts in that industry, so we will hire people to be the experts. That job title is industry advisor internally, but no one externally cares what you call an industry advisor. So like, pick what you think that would like translate to in the real world that you're working in. And of course it makes complete sense to do it like that. And so then you get this really cool title, but it fits into the mechanics of the big machine that says, well, it needs to do that. And then the job is, how do you go and advise industry internally and externally on that? So it sort of fits. But yeah, I was really, again, I remember being really nervous. I was like, but I don't want to put, like, industry advisor feels like a really naff title for where I've come from and what I'm doing next. Like industry advisor at Microsoft makes it feel like I'm, I don't know, stamping pieces of paper with NHS logos or something. Like it felt really silly. And I don't know, you have to pick what you want to do in order to make it work. So that's where the title came from, and that's sort of the thing behind it. But it is quite a cool title.
Can I ask you a really stupid question? And I feel like I should know the answer to this, but I also feel like it's really complex and you'll be able to shine some light on it. But like, what does big tech like Microsoft, like taking Microsoft as an example, what do they actually do in healthcare? Because in my mind, I've got like Word and Excel and that side of things. I've then got like, and yeah, it's an intentional pun, this nebulous cloud thing. Like there's something to do with that and that means there's something to do with the data, and they're probably helping things in a different way in the back end as well. So you quite rightly say, the NHS can't operate without Microsoft. Why? What is it actually that Microsoft's doing in healthcare? Like, do you have a way of classifying that or like helping me organize that in my mind?
We classify it internally on a sort of 3 horizon phase. So I think that might work. I've not really said this out loud, so like edit it if it doesn't really make sense. But the part one, you go, well, what is it that you need right now? And you go, well, what I need right now is the ability to communicate with somebody in the hospital or somebody in a different, whatever. I need the ability to communicate. Okay, well, I need technology in order to communicate for that. So I need an email service. There's Outlook for that. I need an operating system to run my computers. Okay, well, I need an operating system. Like no frontline worker that we would call, say, clinician cares about the operating system per se, but I need something that makes a computer work. So I've got to pick one, and that's Windows. If you go back in the day, I need a directory of service, or I need some form of database for all of my patients. So again, that was all built on, I need some tech to do that, whatever thing. So there's stuff that just you need today in order to look at stuff, do stuff on a computer. That would be Horizon type 1. Then there's Horizon 2 in the way that we think about it, which is stuff that is out but not fully done yet. So, well, what's next on that? So, like, we can't all be on the old. Do you remember, like, you had to know a little bit of coding in order to find a patient in the olden days? Like, you had to be able to, like, write the command to pull up the blood results for somebody, like, and all of that was a real pain. And now, of course, you just click a button in an EPR. You're like, well, what does that sort of thing look like as coming next? So we call that Horizon 2. Of course, hopefully all of that stuff becomes Horizon 1 when it succeeds. There'll be some stuff in that bucket that just won't work as well as we think it might. So that's where I sit mostly in Horizon 2. You're like, well, what can we do? What can we do now, but we're not maybe doing maximally? That's where FDP or trusted research environments or using data or the NHS app, or think of anything that you think is not really dull that you take for granted, but that we're doing and show some promise. What is it we're trying to do in that space? So my job is, how do we try and work out what should be in that camp? How do we explain that to the people building it? How do we explain that to the people that might use it, and try and make that communication, those conversations, like maximally valuable? And then the third stuff is Microsoft Research or stuff that's far out. So you know, what is your doctor as a hologram like in the future? What is all of that? So there's stuff that's sort of like, you don't expect it to land for 4 or 5 years, but you might want to start doing some partnerships with people to start getting the data on that now, or trying to understand what that might look like. So that's where I think that's how big tech exists. Now it's a component part, right? The same way that medicine is like drugs are a component part of a care plan. I think it's increasingly become a component part because communication is a huge part of what we do, and communication is all going digital. So that's becoming more and more prevalent in people's thinking. And then also the really boring stuff is getting so voluminous that, like, that's what AI is really exciting. You go, well, amazing. Like, on Friday, I was in the hospital, and I remember seeing this patient, and I'd said to them like a month ago, oh, if you kept a symptom diary of all of the headaches that your child had, that'd be really helpful for when I see you again. And true to form, they brought a laptop in and showed me the Excel spreadsheet of all of the data that they had. And I was like, oh, amazing. I don't quite know how to sift through this. Right. Like, so I was like, now typically what happens when we ask for a symptom diary, as you know, like, people go, well, I've kept a bit of a diary, and from that, I think I've got this insight, and like, where should we go from there is what you ideally want. But I was like, actually, if you just give me the raw data, which technically I asked for, I don't know how to get the insights out of it in the time that I've got to see you. Like, I can't be the data analyst for all of your data when it's so granular. And I was like, wouldn't it be amazing to have a little co-pilot that sits there that says, like, oh, tell me about what I might infer from this or whatever else. So that sort of stuff is quite exciting.
And you can see it now, can't you? Like, they have the AI just on their machine, that by the time they put the data in, it's already giving them those insights. And actually, you start to reorganize healthcare and cut the clinician side out of it, even at that point, or indeed the clinician's role is changed to then be someone that guides them through that, rather than, as you quite rightly say, like, you know, sitting there sifting through raw data and stuff. You've brought it up, so let's get into it. So, AI. What are you guys, well, actually, let me just go personally for you. Like, how do you feel about where we are currently? Because there's a lot of different co-pilots. There's obviously Microsoft are doing so. There's startups doing so, you know, ambient scribes, as they're also called. There's all that side of thing. There's, ignoring generative AI, there's the AI that's been around for a long time, like the old school AI that, you know, machine learning, and remember that term kind of thing. So there's all of that stuff as well, which has been maturing and has been, you know, trialed and tested in pathology and radiology and all the rest of it for quite a long time now, and is feeling a bit more stable, in my opinion. but the term AI is being conflated into lots of different things. And, there's an AI strategy that's come out now. There's the AI oligarchy in the US, Trump's inauguration. There's all sorts being conflated into AI. But from you I always want to put your like sort of practicing pediatrician hat on first of all, and just go like, as a practicing doctor, how do you feel about AI? As a technologist, how do you feel about AI as well? And yeah, just sort of try and cut the wood from the trees here. I'm just sort of interested in where you think we are and what you're excited about.
I think we've jumped over the risk of it being a hype cycle. And maybe I'll come back and eat my words on that, but I feel like we've gone too far for it being a fad. And I always like the analogy of like you compare it to an engine, and you go, well, somebody invented an engine. When you think about engine, you're like, okay, great, I get it. It got cars, that gave us infrastructure. There's an industrial revolution, but also it powers a lawnmower to a generator to a whatever. So there's some baseline tech that sort of changes the way that you can do everything, from then allows you to fly. I think we're all really hopeful that AI, in the biggest sense of that, is that type of tech that can then sort of jump us from where we are today to where we want to get to next, be that landing on Mars as Trump and Elon Musk want to do, or be that solving some of our sustainability challenges by not killing the planet sooner, and so on. More broadly in healthcare, for me, or sort of less broadly in healthcare, actually, like bringing it into what we're seeing, I think it's all about empowering patients. I just think you sit there and I just don't like, I can't think of anything else I do where I completely trust the person doing it without doing a little bit of cross-referencing and checking. Like, even to the extent of getting a new tap fitted, like you go and choose a tap or find out that, and you can learn a little bit about, what the plumber was talking about. Talking a lot about plumbers today. Like, we're getting a new bathroom done. That's entirely why. But this, the 1.5 bar pressure thing, I don't know what that means, but I can easily look it up and I can get that. I think two things for healthcare, like we have deliberately, rightly or wrongly, over the history of healthcare, kept it to an elite group of people that have been able to understand it and then share that. And I think that has to break down because the rest of the world is breaking down from that. And AI offers that. And then the second is that all of the big innovations in healthcare have sort of by hook or by crook, they've either come from a complete accident, Alexander Fleming finding, discovering penicillin by noticing it just sort of almost coincidentally, or by just huge data, or not even huge data, just by good data collection. So Frimley study, we looked at a load of stuff, realised smoking was bad. Like Ignaz Semmelweis looking at data to realise that washing your hands is really important. So I think there's some stuff that we just want by dumb luck that we hope for, but then there's also stuff where we're like, well, if we can collect more data and analyse that data, then we'll be able to make greater insights and greater strides forward. And increasingly, as we get into that, going back to the patient I saw that had the Excel spreadsheet of all of their headache symptoms, well, can that become more personalised for me? Like, rather than me having to wait for a randomised control trial that's collected all of this stuff up and says X, Y, Z, and of course, that's what we've always been looking for in healthcare. Like, you tell me a load of stuff and I'll say, well, have you tried reducing screen time? Have you had your eyes checked? Are you drinking enough water? Loads of the simple stuff before I have to start giving you medications and risking side effects. So I think that's why I'm excited about it, because I think we have to collect more data individually and collectively for our healthcare benefit or improve our outcomes. But the ability to analyze it has always been like a real block. I mean, even back in the Babylon days, we're like, oh, brilliant, we can get all of this stuff and we've got all of these new data points. But we struggle to analyze it in a way that was like commercially viable. So how do you do that in a way that like lowers unit economics of delivery of healthcare? Because if you can't do that, then you sort of don't get a place at the start line. And then also translate it into something that's really individually valuable to the person in front, like the person that's dealing with it. Because best will in the world, like I could be a really great doctor and care about the patient in front of me, but I don't care anywhere near as much as most of the parents care about their children. So empowering them to do that, I think, is going to be like transformational, and that's really exciting.
Yeah, I saw a video the other day of it was a TikTok video about and someone was taking the mick out of people around when the first iPhone came out, because obviously the iPhone right now has so much utility across every facet of our lives. But when it came out, I don't know if you remember, there was the app where you shook it and it sounded like a whip. So you could like whip people. So this is, and the joke, and there was the one about you tip it and it's like, you can see the fluid and it's like you're drinking a beer.
Yeah.
So there was that one.
And the X-ray one, like the,
X-ray one. Yeah, exactly. So the joke was that like people around at that point were so unbelievably stupid because they had this life-changing piece of technology that they could have made multi-million-pound businesses with, but instead they were like fake whipping each other and like fake drinking a beer. Like, oh, look at me drinking this bit. Like, oh, look at me having this X-ray of my hand. Like, I just wonder, like, we seem to be in a kind of almost like in part at least a gimmicky phase, where. Maybe not gimmicky phase. Maybe that's too harsh. But I feel that I have this super powerful piece of technology, but I don't quite know how to use it to its maximal effect. It's not quite clicking. Yes, I now have this text interface and voice, and I can voice call ChatGPT now and OpenAI. I can do all these things, but I find myself walking around my house like I video called it the other day and like showed it a plant and I was like, what shall I do about this plant? It was like, yeah, you're probably overwatering it. And I did it. I was like, okay, cool. But like, maybe I could have just Googled that. Like, so I feel like we're on some sort of precipice to using your pediatric patient example of, okay, if you have the new Mac iOS, you can activate the intelligence button. It will look at the spreadsheet on screen. It will give you some insights. But now I'm a bit concerned about patient data. And now I'm a bit concerned about, is that going to be able to offer me the right thing? It's not a regulated medical device and all that sort of stuff. And obviously we're very much talking about generative AI now. But obviously Microsoft is doing things in this space. There are co-pilots. I remember when I was sat with Malone in WeWork and you came over and showed me the Microsoft Copilot and stuff and mind blowing at the time. Only a few weeks later, it's like, oh yeah, another one. I don't know, like, how do you share my frustration that we're at some sort of precipice, like that we're not quite getting all the value? And I guess what are Microsoft doing? Like, do you have any insight to how we might unlock the next phase of all this stuff that practically we know is possible, but we do actually move care closer to the community using intelligence and all that sort of stuff? Like, do you have any insights on that?
I don't know if they're insights. I've got hopes. I mean, for Microsoft to give you a sense of like we don't know, but we know something's about to happen. You'll have seen the hiring of Mustafa Suleiman as our sort of CEO of AI. He's like wonderfully set up something in London, like sort of super cool because we're here. So he set up an AI hub in London. He's hired some great brains like Chris Kelly and Dom King, Peter Hames, Bay Gross. Like, so they've gone like, and I saw them. In fact, I'm seeing Chris tonight, and that like they're just sat there going like, how do we do this, right? How do we make it as valuable as it possibly could be? So, like you said, that we sit there thinking, if 10 to 15% of Google searches are healthcare related, like if we'd have known that before we like made Google, would we have made Google in a different way? Like, and I don't know the answer. Like, because it's always after the fact. Okay, well, if co-pilots, not just our co-pilot, but this sort of prompting thing becomes the default norm for how people do stuff. Like you say about your plant, like the other day, actually, in fact, last night, somebody was like, what fish have you got on your wall? I was like, good point. I don't know. Like, but you could just sort of point the camera, click, what fish have I got? And you've got them. If that's the new norm, then what can we think about from the beginning in healthcare to hopefully get us further, faster towards better value, better outcomes? So I think we're all trying to figure that out, but we know something is going to happen. So your sense, I think, is all of our sense. And by all of us, I mean, including big tech, where we're sat there going like, we should know, but we don't know. And actually, we were talking about Stargate, weren't we? Like this, like Elon Musk and Sam Altman saying, yeah, we're looking at this for oncology and we're looking at other bits and pieces because Trump was like, how are you going to like use it in healthcare? And I think everyone's going like there are so many ways that sort of stops us from thinking, how do we immediately use it? You know, I think about the last big revolution. Maybe that's the wrong phrasing, but the last big thing I can think of, like Da Vinci robots. Remember, like Da Vinci robots, and like, but like they were only ever going to be used for surgery. So you were like already limited to like, well, what surgery could I do for this? And where do I start? Whereas for this, it could be anything from, like you say, ambient voice to make my clinics more efficient, to patient engagement, to complete total patient care or whatever. And that makes regulation really hard. That makes knowing where to start really hard. The other thing on it, and this is I take from my Babylon days, it's also really hard when you can do everything to build momentum in one thing. And you do need to build up that momentum to then be able to say, right, I'm doing this now, and I'm going to hit the next roadblock, and I'm going to overcome it, and then I'm going to go on to like the journey that I'm trying to get to is there. When it's a, you know, like let's all go live on Mars destination, you end up with like so many different things. It becomes quite hard to zero it in. I think going back to all of the silliness that we talked about, like, of course, it was a bit silly, but the best thing about it was it broke that into other people wanting it. I mean, it made Apple the, you know, biggest company in the world, you know, and the iPhone, it made the iPhone, in part because of the App Store, if not almost entirely because of the App Store, because more people wanted it. And I think in healthcare, what I want and what my patients want, although like at high level are super aligned, probably, and we've never really done this, like day to day, there are so many people that are involved in it. I'll take that kid with a headache and the parent and me, like we all want the same big goal, but not the next immediate thing. Like it might be a bit different. So the child might be sitting there thinking like, all I really want is to, well, actually, this is entirely the problem. We presume we know what they want. So I'll be like, well, they want to be able to go back to school. Or I might be like, actually, they don't want to go to school, which is why they're saying they've got headaches. The parent will be like, I want to make sure they don't have something awful, like a brain tumor, potentially, or whatever else. I don't know. And then I'll be sat there thinking, like, I just want the next piece of information to help me decide if this is a migraine that I need to treat with a medicine or not. And I think because we're all coming at it with slightly different next steps, that's where this will start saying, well, like if we can get people excited about it to engage in different ways, we'll get to where we get to. So going back to the silly apps that sort of started the iPhone, like everybody found one of them that was useful for them, and then they coalesced around it being sort of useful more globally. So I'm overextending the analogy, but like if we had an app in that 3-person scenario, if we had an app that could solve that. So if the kid could sit and talk to a Copilot or a GPT or something and say, what I really want is this, and the parent could say that, and I could say that, and then those 3 things could look at that data set and say, actually, we think this is what's happening. Like, that would be quite cool. We might have stumbled on a great idea. We should maybe let's do that. But you know, there's that sort of like, that would be good. Now, often, of course, because of the way healthcare works, the parent never has the real conversation with the child. The doctor's only got 8 minutes to talk to them, and we make so many assumptions. Even when we give our medicines, as we well know, they're all based on, you know, white males that weigh 70 kilos. So there's a whole host of stuff in there that could be potentially transformed by having these new little tools that solve them.
I think it's a really interesting concept. This, when you can do everything, where do you start? I think I really see that as a challenge at the moment. In the UK, we've seen Keir Starmer come out with the AI. Well, I say Keir Starmer come out with the AI strategy. He's responded to the AI strategy and said, yes, I agree with everything, or at least the Labour government has. So there's definitely this push to be sort of aligned on AI infrastructure, although nothing particularly specific about healthcare. And this is where I think that there's definitely room for improvement, because I know you and I have talked about this before, and this helps me segue into what you're thinking of, what you are doing, is that if we're gonna if we're going to use AI in a meaningful way, I think it's my belief that we should focus onto a vision of what we want healthcare to be. Without that, everyone's going to be trialing and piloting AI and pulling the eventual model of healthcare in different directions. I don't think we've ever aligned, because we've never had a technology powerful enough that could redesign the entire of healthcare. I don't think we've actually plotted any sort of roadmap of this is what we think perfect healthcare is possible to be with this technology. And here are the stages of how we morph healthcare to get there. And that eventual vision could be crazy. It could be no hospitals. It could be no clinicians. It could be no this. No, it could be lots of other things. It could be, instead of doctors that memorize facts, you have care navigators that are assessed their emotional empathy and their ability to work with AI technology, and they're purely trained in that, and they guide you through a system. Like that, we've not decided on what we want, and therefore you've got people trialing AI. You've got faster horses currently. You've got a healthcare system as it stands currently, and you've got AI going in to make the processes that currently exist a bit quicker, a bit better, a bit faster, a bit this, a bit that, the other. So like even the concept of, I remember saying this to Keith Grimes when he came on, the concept of AI scribes. I mean, you and I are both like this, it's incredible because we've clerked patients and we know the burden of taking notes.
Our kids would have longer names, right?
Well, our kids would have longer names, quite right. Subliminally, they absolutely would. But yeah, Keith said, well, in a world of AI, why do you even need notes? And it's interesting. It's fascinating that these kind of challenges of like, oh yeah, but if we decide that's the world that we want, then okay, we all need to be pulling in that direction. So actually, so certain things that are being trialed and tested beyond the point become irrelevant because we're actually focused. I don't think there is a body that exists that has the right or responsibility or inclination even to actually set what the vision for that might actually be, but then to actually defend the clinical voice of clinicians are great because they care about patients deeply. They deeply, deeply, deeply care about patients, and they care about things not falling over. They care about things not breaking. So there are always safety nets and workarounds and all these things. And so clinicians are very well placed to guide you through into a new world, as long as someone's holding our hands to actually show us that, no, it is possible. It is okay. You can say that. And I think that hasn't been set. If that were set, I think that it would help focus us with AI. And that's my view. That's just my personal belief and view. And I think we perhaps, an easy argument against what I've said would be that it's very early days, and actually we do need to spread our bets. We do need to be trialing and testing AI in all these places. And frankly, we need much faster horses. Like we definitely do. So actually all the effort going into trial and testing everything, we can actually just maybe sit and take a view in 5 years and start to iterate based on that. I don't know. But that's the problem that I see, or one of the problems that I see with AI currently, is that it is a bit of a catch-all term. We are trialing and testing it everywhere. There's no fixed vision of what we want a healthcare to be, and so we're creating a lot of faster horses. How do you feel about that?
I think he's saying that I heard this story, and I wish I could remember all of the facts, and I'll have to post it in the comments with the actual things. But for the purpose of the story, I'll make up a couple of bits that are in between it. But I don't know, like in the 1800s, there was this group of people that were climbing Mount Everest or some form of mountain, like an army unit that were climbing a mountain. There was a storm or whatever. There was bad weather. They got stuck. They got lost, completely disorientated, and they had no ability or no real belief that they were going to be able to get out and survive. Right. So they're stuck. Then one of them found a map in their pocket. And so from the map in their pocket, they looked at it like, oh my God, this is amazing. It saved us. We've got some way of following, our route to home. They followed the map and they got out eventually. It then turned out, so the kicker in the story is it turned out when they got to where they were going, they realized that the map was for like the Pyrenees, not the Andes or whatever. Like it was entirely the wrong map, but the fact that they had a map gave them the belief and the wherewithal to go. I mean, that's partly why I set up this group that we were talking about. So this British Healthcare and AI group, because I started thinking, like, look, we sort of know where we want to do, which is get out from where we are, right? So we want to get out from,
God,
like,
yeah, we do.
increasing people coming in, corridor care, like people being scared, all of that stuff. Now, part one. Part two of the insights are like, it's a game we're never going to win, right? So this, like, we're never going to make, you know, at least in our lifetimes, no one's going to live forever and be completely pain-free. And so there's something about, we have to reset to what keeps, what success for us looks like is getting out of where we are, which is feeling that we can't even do the things that we want to do when we go in to work as doctors and nurses, or anybody working in the NHS. So we can't even achieve that. That's really sad. And for patients, we want to give them the hope of going, yeah, look, of course, I'm not going to win this and live forever, but I definitely want to be able to, if I do fall over and break my hip, get seen within a timely fashion, as opposed to thinking, do you know what, it might be 3 days before I even get the most basic of care that I need in order to get through this, and so on. So if we know the destination is getting out from where we are and we don't have a map, and I mean, because it's net new, it's like one of the things the NHS has done brilliantly as a healthcare system has been a bit of a map, because it was set up early. It's always talked about as an alternative to what anyone else has done. That's not to say that people should, like, you know, we might think everybody should do the NHS. But in the US, for example, when they had all of their problems and Obamacare came in, they were like, well, we've got a bit of a map with the NHS. Let's take that, get started, and see if we can get somewhere. And, you know, I won't get into the American side of things, but, you know, almost every health system I visited has said, look, we've taken what you've done in the NHS and then thought about it, you know, it's got us going on our journey to where we're trying to get to. With that in mind, I was like, why can't we start writing a new map based on what we know? And going back to that original thing of how do we narrow it down, so we've got some focus. So I thought, well, let's limit it to the UK as a starter. That's not to say that we won't get inputs from global or think about things outside of the UK, but let's just take, you know, people that work in the NHS or are interested in British healthcare or aligned to British healthcare that are thinking about doing something about, or just generally interested in AI, and start a bit of a community. And that idea, I remember it really vividly, because I was going off to do a talk, and I was like, I don't know how to end the talk. I don't know how to say to people, like, if you are, hopefully what I've said will be interesting and inspiring and you'll want to go off and do something about it. But I don't know where to send you for that. And I don't want to just send you to a Microsoft resource, because that didn't feel right. Like, you know, of course, as Microsoft, we can help you, or Google, or whoever can help you. But, like, really, I didn't want to send you back to big tech. I wanted you to send you somewhere more collaborative and internal. And if there were doctors, I could be like, there's a few places you can go as a doctor, or if you're a nurse, maybe there's a few nurse specific things, or whatever there may be. But there wasn't just a one click forum for, like, I'm part of this, I can share stuff. So I set up a LinkedIn group like that morning. So I set it up, like, generated the QR code, and was like, I'll put this at the end of the talk and just see how it does. And that did really well. So now there's about 550 odd people that have joined the group. I would love us to start doing more with it, which is why I came to you. I was like, who do I know that is great at building communities, that is going to be able to give an unbiased view of what's going on, and maybe put some good content up. And that's where we got to. So I guess if you said, what was your vision for it? I would like us to have a little bit of a blank piece of paper and to start putting some points of a map together, knowing that that map might not be the right map, but at least we're contributing to that map. And I'd also like the people that are contributing to that map to be people on the shop floor. So people that have got the lived experience of using it, not just people that are like the decision makers already. Like, potentially I'm one of the decision makers already, given what I do with Microsoft and my role. And I think, like, sometimes that like, it sounds great, but it's also quite scary when you're sat there going, like, well, I don't know. Like, you know, I'd hate, for example, to force the agenda to be something that I think is going to be the right thing to do, and then realize that it's not. I think, oh, that was a really wasted opportunity. So that was it, really. It was about how do we get a load of people together and how do we start collecting some thoughts, ideas, and enthusiasm.
I think it's going to be incredibly useful and important work, this. And I think history will look back favourably on it. And I think that there's been a couple of things recently that, I say recently, it's literally now, that I'm seeing and that we're seeing. In the US with Trump's inauguration, we're seeing a concentration of power. We're seeing a concentration of power, particularly around technology and AI, when the leaders of all the big tech were at the inauguration. Of course, it's a president. That's not to suggest that they have a political leaning either way. But I know that Zuckerberg's come out and said similar things to what Elon Musk has come out and said, and like there's starting to be a concentration of power now. In the UK, we have a very politicized healthcare system. If the same thing were to happen in the UK, where people have a very, if there was an Elon Musk type character, a capitalist who owned businesses interfering with politics in the same way, it would be very dangerous for healthcare, because healthcare is politicized. And then you have the uninformed, informed by someone with a motive, and all of a sudden, all of that power is concentrated and all of that decision-making is concentrated. I think what the group that you're suggesting, a clinical group of people that apolitically have mapped a view of where they believe appropriate technology is deployed and how it's deployed, and how AI as a very powerful technology could be used in healthcare is deployed, I think is incredibly important work, because just to have a credible voice, that initially it will be clinicians, but I imagine the view would be that increasingly it would be the public even could look to, that has open decision making and open communication and minuted meetings as to how they got to certain viewpoints and all the rest of it. But this very transparent view, and it can be disparate views, it can be opposing views, it can be debate, and it should be debate about the best use of AI and what that map and what is and what the future looks like. It should be all of those things. But so much of healthcare is about trust, and so much of AI is behind a black box that I think we've always struggled with that as a concept, and to deploy algorithms, and we don't really know how they work, and clinicians just wanting to control what they can control, and they've learnt the books and they've got their own algorithm in their head and all this sort of stuff. I think trust is incredibly important. I don't think it's far-fetched to imagine a world in the UK similar to what is happening in the US, but in healthcare with worse consequences. Potentially. I don't think that's particularly far-fetched at all, given some of the characters involved in politics at the moment. So yeah, I think it's really interesting, and I think it's such important work. My question is, what's your view of where this group would sit in terms of some of that decision making? Are you hoping this would be like a lobbying group that would be close to Westminster, or would it be, and in terms of like structurally, is there going to be like a leadership that sources opinion from everyone and then contributes that opinion, or is all of this still up for grabs?
A little bit all up for grabs. I mean, when we were chatting about it, and we were like, we should have a go at trying to launch it properly, so it's not just a side thing that will sort of wither on the vine. What I'd love us to see is, say, a bit more coordinated content that gets put up. So there's a little bit of just general education and steerage towards stuff that we think is good, and for people to sort of self-contribute, or like, so sort of, let's like rise the tide so that everybody goes, well, I've got this, focus a bit on that. And I mean, talking to some other people in positions like mine about how do we form that little group that might then be able to take what we found and say, look, here's our base evidence, but we can present it in the forums that we've got access to say, right, we've got this. I mean, it was, when the Labour government came in, I can't remember, it was October, November, where they put out that there was a website, wasn't there? If anybody's got any ideas about how to change the NHS for the better, enter this in, and then we'll report back on it. I was like, oh, great. We could have submitted something to that and been like, here's some pre-baked, ready stuff from people. And there are lots of little things around, and this is not I'd love the community to be the community itself, as opposed to it, like your point, right? This shouldn't be the voice of one person saying, here's my opinion of it, and I've got X number of followers, and therefore that validates it. It should be, here's a group that has come to a consensus. It may take some of us to be able to present that, because not everybody can get a seat at the table to present it, but I want the views to be representative of a wider group.
It's really interesting that you just said shouldn't be representative of your number of followers. That is a fascinating concept, because we do currently exist in a world where your ability to garner attention is directly proportional to the amount of power that you have, which is quite bizarre as a concept. I don't know if perhaps that's always been the case for some time, but yeah, that is strange, especially with the way that big tech works and social media platforms. You just have direct distribution to so many people if you're just able to gather the attention in the first place. I think the idea of this,
how do you do something that is so like the barrier to entry is low enough? Because you're right, like how do I currently sort of vote for my view on a thing? Is will I follow that person, or I like that? That's the lowest entry thing. I can do that in a moment. I mean, like if we created there was another thing I got asked to potentially join the other day, and it was like, well, you have to fill in this form, and I was like, but the barrier is just a couple of levels higher.
Yeah,
and that makes it really hard to get that. So they were saying about, say, like for this, it was like, what's the easiest entry point? Right, just click a button on LinkedIn. Okay, great. Like a few barriers, you've got to be on LinkedIn. Okay, I'll sort of cover. That's okay, by the way, that I was thinking about it. But you're right. I think otherwise you do end up with some really great groups, but they're so hard to get into that the vast majority of people don't get into them. And then if we do that, we don't do what we try to do, which is like with our vision of like, how do we get the voice from the front to be able to like feed back to the decision makers what they're seeing. So
I think it's honestly, I think it's fascinating. I do honestly see a world where it becomes so important. I think just that concept of, people with more followers get more power. I think we're in a point in the world where certain individuals do have all of that power concentrated, and I think though the world is quite good at equalizing when it needs to. And I think there's enough power in a public movement, full stop, that when I think a group like this comes up, and I think if we're able to shine a light on it in the right way, to prove its governance and to prove the quality of its decision making through its governance and its processes, and with people like yourself and the leaders of other big tech as well that I know you've spoken to about joining this as well, it becomes a an incredibly powerful entity that commands respect and deserves to be listened to when you do have the heads of all the big tech in there from a healthcare perspective. And as I say, you have the governance right there. It's transparent, and it actually has the ability to take the views of 50,000 clinicians in the UK, 100,000, 200,000, 500,000 clinicians around the world, or whatever. Or I know it's talking about British specifically, but I think it's important because everyone in healthcare as well, all the clinicians will have independent experiences and views of these things, and I think it's incredibly important to get everybody's view on this, that your experience as a clinician listening to about someone's headaches that gave you a spreadsheet that you anonymized and ran through an LLM, and it produced something that was useful, and you were scared to use it, but you read around it and you actually decided that it had the same recommendation as what you would have done had you have done all that work yourself. And that as an experience is valuable. That is valuable to our conversation about how we reorganize care. That clinician that might be just in the middle of nowhere in the UK that thinks that's not valuable, it is valuable. And so to have a mechanism to actually flow this information upwards to help with overall decision making, to help with overall policy change, I think is the important work. Because one thing that I was going to just mention is policy, because in a politicized healthcare system, we are at the mercy of policy change. Similarly, policy change can change so much about and enable so much about the way that we do things. I think one of the most important functions of a group like this will be to be close to Westminster, to be lobbying for policy change that does enable things. Because if we're in a world where there's debate around LLMs as medical devices, or is it moral and ethical for AI to be delivering talking therapies, or there are these big questions and conversations that this group doesn't need to provide an answer, but this group could provide a heck of a lot of research. It could provide color on the spread of opinion. It could provide anecdotal stories. It could provide so much that can help inform that decision or refine that decision, or mean that we no longer take this single view or decision. We actually go a bit further to say that's not actually the question. The question needs to be refined into, for this group and this population that have been waiting this long, should they be exposed to talking therapy for a short amount of time with the promise of an in-person later? That's actually the question, or whatever it is that we decide, this group decides to do. I think that stuff is where the important work lives. I think that's where the world changing stuff is. I think that's where the map's drawn. I honestly do, because you're right. There's no functional mechanism for us or anybody in the UK to report those experiences, even though they are valuable. So your point earlier about collecting data to inform decisions, that's 101 for that, surely. And I think, I don't know, that for me seems like quite an important function.
Yeah, exactly. You reminded me that I won't name the minister, but I spoke to a minister, and it wasn't a health minister; it was a general minister, and they were like, "I've got this great thing," and it was all based on the conversation they had with somebody that lived along their road that was a doctor. And I was like, and and so much of that is true of the world, and that
I can totally believe it. Yeah,
you're we can be better than that, right? It doesn't have to be a randomized control trial that you have to get to, but we can collate a little bit of stuff.
Just a lady down the road.
Yeah, because it's always my joke. If the world is left to me, then we just solved my constipation clinic problem, right? Imagine that you put the world's biggest LLM and you task it to just solve constipation. How rubbish would that be? And I'd love us for this to be able to go what I've got an idea. I don't happen to live in the same street as anybody in government, but I can still contribute towards something that can then get fed back. Yeah, that's a really important principle.
How do people find it? Where does it live?
So it lives on LinkedIn at the moment, and it's called British Healthcare AI, for want of a catchy going back to this, everything has to be 4 letters, like a 4-letter thing. So it lives on LinkedIn at the moment. We'll launch a website after this, and just to give a bit more about the governance, so people can just click through that and see some of the sort of people that were involved. If you're interested and you are, like I say, aligned to healthcare in the UK, then and interested in AI, then please do join. And a bit like you said, we don't quite know where to take it. So if you've got ideas about it, you want to get involved in different ways, then please do just let me know. And we'll, hopefully foster a community that will go on and like you say, at least draw out some form of map, or at least, be given, a part of the map that we can influence.
Before I let you go, mate, what's exciting you at the minute, apart from this? In technology, in healthcare, in, I don't know, pick anything you like, but I guess it would make sense to talk about some sort of AI stuff. But Is there anything that's going on at the minute that's particularly exciting you?
Do you know what I said this the other day, and somebody was like, you realise the thing I was talking to someone at a big venture capital firm, right? Not about anything in particular, just like mood music, what's going on in the world and others. And he was like, God, what's cool? I think we can do some really exciting stuff in contracting. And he was like, that's like the uncoolest, the most boring thing. And so, but I think that's probably true right now. What I'm really excited about is some unlocks in like procurement challenges and stuff like that. Because
right.
I sort of feel like, there's a load of great ideas, like so many fantastic ideas that just they're like heart sink patients, aren't they? Like they're the most amazing ideas that can't scale. And you're going I don't get it. Like, why can't that scale? That makes sense. And like everyone, and so we've been working through ways of how do you unblock that? What's the real problem? Will AI feature in it? Well, yes, because it features in everything, but like to the core of it, like it'll be the most dull thing. But I'm quite excited about us being able to unlock some of those things. I was with some lawyers, and so Hamza and Charlotte, and Hamza, as he left the room, was like, "That is so not what I was expecting from you." just just feels so unsexy. But I think important. I don't know if that answers the question. That's quite exciting. If I want to see something really exciting, I'd say robots. I'm still obsessed with robots. I feel I think they're gonna. I think the way that you can start doing stuff with the robots now based on the Gen AI ability to look at the data and like train them better and do others, I think is going to be really fascinating.
Tesla robots, are they real? Those Tesla robots, they look pretty real.
I think they were, yeah. I think so. I mean, I was in a Waymo. I was in San Francisco and I was in a Waymo. Like that. Then you're like,
oh, really?
That's
the self-driving cars.
Yeah. So like self-driving taxis, like that is like phenomenal. Like you're like, okay, well, if you can do this, then you can definitely remove an appendix. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That sort of stuff I think is really cool. And then when you start thinking about all of those little procedures and others, if I'm back in limiting in healthcare, but yeah, just all up tech, I think robots are cool. So
then what do the humans do? So this is why we need a map, and this is why we need to figure this stuff out.
But do you know what? Like the Waymo was fantastic, but it was awful for chatter. Like it wouldn't tell me where I should go for dinner whilst I was in town.
Well, there you go. Unintended negative consequence. Cool, man. Listen, absolute pleasure to have you on. For those people that want to learn more about you or Microsoft, or indeed want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do so?
LinkedIn is by far my sort of weapon of choice on that. Like I think I'm on there more than anything else, and it helps to focus in on bits. So yeah, please do find me on LinkedIn, join the group if you can do that, or message me and I'll send you the link to it. But that's where I am most of the time.
We'll put all the links to website, LinkedIn group, etc. in the description of this episode. So yeah, Umang, absolute pleasure, mate. Until the next time. Probably won't wait 6 years, but yeah, we'll get you on a little bit soon.
It's so personally, James. But, yeah, I love it.